Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you all for coming today to this valuable workshop. This is the manufacturing capacity section. My name is Michelle Feinberg. I am the founder of the New York Embroidery Studio. This next session in the series is aimed at discussing the PPE and PPT standards around specific components of the supply chain, and will focus on discussing the standards around PPE, PPT manufacturers, specifically manufacturing capacity. Here, this panel is going to examine how standards can impact PPE and PPT manufacturers' capacity, both as a means to facilitate increasing capacity and as a potential barrier. I myself am a fashion manufacturer. I've been in business for 30 years in New York City's Garment Center. I've built my career on creative and innovative solutions for unique fashion challenges. My business and my employees were at the epicenter of COVID in March 2020. We were the very first essential business in New York City, and we started using our ultrasonic welding equipment to make PPE by April 1st of 2020. Our first challenge was finding fabric. I was able to use my fashion manufacturing experience and my supply chain to source fabric. I quickly learned that PPE fabric manufacturing was largely offshored, but fabric manufacturers are willing to retool and innovative, but we need to support our industrial base to reinforce our supply chain so that in the future, should we need to flex and surge, the domestic base must exist. We would like to utilize the technology and educate the end user to provide feedback to the manufacturer. So for our discussion, I would like to introduce Dan Glucksman, the Public Affairs Director of ISEA.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
And just briefly, ISEA is an organization of companies that design, test, manufacture, and supply a wide range, including respirators. But also in our product mix includes manufacturers of nitrile gloves and protective garments. And I'm actually going to pick up on sort of the second half of your comment about sort of how standards could actually limit the production of. We believe at ISEA that standards need to be logically feasible, and that standards must have a balance of performance, but also end user needs, and that if there's a product that's overly complex and over engineered because of standards, that it won't be made, either because of the expense of meeting the standards, or even perhaps because the complexity of using the product in the field. It also needs to be commercial feasibility, that a product made under a standard must have a commercial case, and that too many niche needs could defray the potential market and reduce the likelihood of a product ever going into production. And while, like some other speakers in previous panels, I'll, generally argue against more product standards, we do see a lot of adjacent standards having a lot of value in PPE resiliency. For example, perhaps some kind of a standard on comfort that the public could use as a kind of a first step evaluating a product. Disinfection, NIOSH, EPA, OSHA, and other agencies could come up with recommendations for common disinfection of reusable respirators. We talked about the disabled, but to some degree, there's also we think some need for the elderly, not including the non-disabled elderly who might have trouble donning and doffing a respirator and may have issues with skin elasticity. In terms of some other standards gaps that could help the PPE supply chain, some kind of easily conducted evaluation of expired respirators, rather than relying on NIOSH to go back and conduct essentially certification testing on respirators. Some type of test that can be done outside of that regulatory structure to help stockpile managers know if products, some kind of accelerated aging test, a standard, that manufacturers could perform, and so they can evaluate the effects of accelerated aging, on respirators and the component parts. And then one thing people have sort of discussed, but maybe not so directly, is a standard for the actual physical structure of warehouses. For example, there have been stories of warehouses with, say, broken windows, where humidity and light get in. So let's use some of the funding that's now floating around to have best-in-class warehouses that will maintain constant low levels of humidity and managing light. I think other people talked about, and I would also underscore that another way to improve not only the supply chain, but what's needed in that supply chain is better guidance, especially when you're talking about federal, state, and local guidance, harmonizing that as best as possible in terms of managing what's needed versus everyone as much. And that's all. Thank you, Michelle, and look forward to listening to my colleagues in the discussion.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Now I'd like to turn it over to Claudio Dente from Dentech.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I apologize. I've been running around the house trying to have a stable connection, so just bear with me. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this very important work group. Standards are specific to product testing and performance to ensure product is manufactured in a manner that ensures the product is made consistently to protect the requirements to the standard. We must make sure the standards do not hinder the ability of bringing product to market with speed. I can speak of respiratory protection specifically and the challenges the market and we as a company faced throughout the pandemic. Manufacturing in Kansas using American-made raw materials. NIOSH deals with the occupational workplace. However, there's a gap in how we offer protection to the public. Can NIOSH provide guidance for respirator use to the public that would allow for a reduced fit testing protocol to help get the public protected as quickly as possible? If NIOSH cannot provide guidance for this, who can we turn to? We must take into account children. In the case of reusable respirators, we created for the pandemic without an exhalation valve. I was able to fit my 7-year-old granddaughter with our N95 version. My point with this comment is that it can be done and it's available. We must be able to provide protection to the healthcare and public simultaneously for the next pandemic. When dealing with manufacturing for surge demand, the following elements are key operational challenges needed to produce, ship product, assuming there's no certification issues. Raw materials. Manufacturers of filtration material, resins, packaging, and other components run their business on historical information and do not want to and will not stockpile inventory in hopes that it is needed, as we've heard earlier. The financial burden and space requirement is not fiscally responsible. Most all suppliers of raw materials are sitting on a glut of inventory now that is declining because of causing financial stress. That's a leftover from dealing with pandemics. Staffing. While many companies, including ours, invested in improved automation during the pandemic, our products require hand assembly that cannot be automated. Finding and training staff during pandemics is difficult to say the least. Additionally, we manufacturers are unable to maintain that staffing level that we had during the pandemic in hopes that we're going to need product in the future. It's just not possible. Buildings. In order to support the surge demand requirements, companies need additional buildings to produce, assemble, warehouse raw materials and finished goods in a manner that allows us to keep up with the pandemic requirements. As a result, what people don't realize or don't, I hate to say this, care about, we have to make financial commitments to those buildings that carry over after when the pandemic subsides. Many companies are dealing with the stresses of this additional space and so forth. And something that we also must be mindful of is our regular business. While we ramp up to produce product for the pandemic, we must not forget the companies that use our products to function properly regardless. The surge orders that we received completely disrupted our ability to provide our respirators for the regular workplace. Whatever we do, we have to make sure that we're able to keep America working, generating revenue, and keep the economy rolling. So now that we have all these problems and possible solutions, I believe stockpiling is the best to prepare for the next pandemic. Not only by the government, we must also have business and industry involved. This will allow the manufacturing communities to build stock in a more controlled manner, allowing them to produce product for their regular business and for the pandemic as best as possible. Manufacturers of raw materials and finished product and distribution cannot carry the burden and risk to produce product for a pandemic situation. It must be a cost of doing business going forward in order for us to reduce the risk of another outbreak, shutting down the economy, people very sick and also dying. Can OSHA or some other regulatory agency impose regulations that require the workplace to put stockpile plan in place, provide tax incentives to name a couple of things? Staffing. I was asked to testify in the congressional hearings for Small Business Committee in 2021, looking for solutions. One of the things that we had to deal with was finding employees. Perhaps we can go to the government and ask for the assistance of military personnel, including veteran, National Guards, and so forth, to help get us ramped up and get moving for the American manufacturers to help allow us to keep up with the pace. And then fit testing. With regards to respirators for the public, offer some type of tax credit or incentive for the user to be fit test certified on a variety of respirators being disposable and reusable. Generally speaking, most of the products in the market have very similar fit testing techniques, which are not difficult to conduct. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Claudio, for that meaningful discussion. And now I'd like to turn it over to Brent Dilley from Premium PPE. Thank you, Brent.
Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate everyone's time today. A little bit about myself. I'm currently one of the managing partners at Premium PPE. We are manufacturers of surgical masks under FDA 510(k) clearance. In the past 2 to 3 years, we've done about 250 million masks produced and sold. About 100 million of that went to the federal government and a large portion to the national stockpile. And we was just recently announced last week by the governor of Virginia. We are proud to be opening a new underpad manufacturing facility in Norfolk, Virginia, to support over 4,000 hospitals in the U.S. So I know a lot of the business owners have come on hard times here. So I guess we're learning the importance of diversification in businesses as well in response to the pandemic. So that's it about me. I don't have any prepared remarks, but I think I look forward to a fruitful discussion around several different areas. I think the supply chain rationale that I know Claudio touched on, I can have a habit of being blunt sometimes, but a lot of these businesses that are in the supply chain and in the healthcare systems themselves are for-profit businesses, which, I mean, as we all know, for better or worse, are tasked with maximizing their profit by reducing costs and increasing their profitability, as kind of harsh as that sounds. So I think supply chains are inevitably going to be a reflection of demand to reach a steady state and achieve max profitability. And I think healthcare systems, unless there's some sort of outside influence from the federal government or some other method, are going to inevitably do the same and look for lower cost products as a way to reduce the cost of healthcare. So I look forward to discussions around those areas. I continue to advocate that there needs to be a presence from the federal government in this to incentivize with tax breaks or VA reimbursements or some mechanism to justify the buyer, the largest buyer of potential products in the country, which is the U.S. healthcare system. You're gonna always have your Fastenals and your Grangers and your industrial component, and the VA, is obviously in itself a massive health system. But the only way to truly make supply chains healthy in this country to prepare for a future pandemic, and that supply chain is all the way from polypropylene to meltblown up through the masks, is to have a robust demand for those products. And the way the system is currently set up, where Chinese providers can import masks for less than the cost that U.S. providers can buy polypropylene for, unless there's some U.S. federal government influence on the buyers, which is the private healthcare system, I think we're going to struggle from a supply chain standpoint and from a standard standpoint. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. And then the final, I guess, question I would pose to the group for discussion is around the modification of standards and what the positive and minuses are for each change in a standard. Obviously, counterfeit PPE and PPT was a massive issue the last few years. So any reduction in the stringency of standards is inviting more counterfeiting, and any increase in the stringency of standards is inviting theoretically less supply rapidly available in a future crisis. So I think there needs to be some consideration around there. I know that the Chinese government requires any sale of masks into their country to have Chinese laboratory tested and approved standards. So I wonder if there's a clever way that the federal government can help regulate this market to make it a more fair place for American businesses.
Great idea. Sorry, I was muted there. I think that's a fabulous idea. Now I'd like to turn it over to Paul Dillinger from Levi's. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, my name is Paul Dillinger. I lead the design innovation group at Levi's, but basically I'm a fashion designer. And like a lot of the apparel companies, as Michelle described at the beginning of the pandemic, there was an interest for us to contribute. We have a huge underutilized resource in the form of the apparel supply chain, which is a globally decentralized and generally standardized resource for manufacturing. They all have the same set of tools and same set of capabilities. None of those were the capabilities of one of the customer or 3M or one of the big PPE manufacturers, but they could all cut and sew garments. And the question was, could we design an effective filtering face piece respirator that would have the commensurate protective or filtration and airflow and fit properties of certified N95, but could we do it using these basic tools and sort of globally standardized minimum capabilities of a cut and sew apparel manufacturer? So that was the brief that I had as a designer, and we through ideation and a lot of work at the beginning of the pandemic, we developed a solution that was able to pass the performance pre-qualification testing that would be necessary to submit to N95 certification. We did that at first at my own workshop at the table I'm sitting at. We did it at our Levi's prototyping facility here in San Francisco. We did it at one of our owned and operated facilities in Cape Town, South Africa. And then that's when we found out that governments were throwing up restrictions inhibiting the export of PPE from individual markets, and that there was going to be a lot more complexity to this than we realized. And fourthly, we developed it at a facility that we own in Plock, Poland. The testing results from all of the iterations were all consistent, but when we went to certify, we and submitted all of our pre-qualification testing results, we realized, oh gosh, every facility is going to be treated as a different item. That the facilities-based certification versus design or object-based certification was going to be a real barrier for us. But we had, a supply chain that was eager, first of all, to get back to work because the whole apparel supply chain shut down because all the stores shut down. And then when they're going back to work, we care deeply about the well-being of the workers in our supply chain. There was no protection for the workers on site. So we developed a solution that we could distribute to every facility that makes for us, and they could easily make it. But our challenge was, what do we call it? How do we describe its value without being able to go through one of the established certification protocols? So our attempt to achieve some degree of validation was to enter the BARDA National Mask Innovation Challenge, and it was a nearly 2-year process that we learned a tremendous amount. We came through as the runner-up. We have with a mask that has really well documented performance and can be turned on and off in manufacturing at a moment's notice. We're stockpiling materials. We have a small stockpile of masks. We have archived the mask design, and we have the patents on the mask design. But the question is what to do in a scenario of uncertain demand, and what to do in a scenario where the only way to describe the validity of the mask's performance is through a manufacturing or facilities-based certification protocol, when in fact the whole value of our design is its interchangeability, its draftability, it's the ability to start and stop production on a dime at apparel manufacturer, and there are apparel manufacturers all over the world. This is an opportunity for service for the global south, for underserved communities where they don't have access to the premium PPE. But we've been struggling to quantify and then leverage and activate the value because it's the certification process is so inconsistent with the way the apparel supply chain works and the interchangeability of production lines. So that's a brief description of where we're at.
Thank you so much, Paul. Now I'd like to turn it over to Andy Moy from Egley Mask Manufacturer.
So, hi, everybody. My name is Andy Moy. I'm CEO of Egley. My background is in technology. I spent 12 years out in Silicon Valley, more in the semiconductor space, helping a lot of U.S. companies start their manufacturing overseas in the Chinese market. Being Chinese American, when the pandemic hit, I got a lot of requests to import these masks, and we obviously discovered everything we know now related to substandard, non-conforming, and counterfeit masks. I tried to go through the traditional supply chains to help out. I had some companies I had invested in that were essential service in California that needed these products, and we weren't able to get them, and so we decided to manufacture, given our experience in the supply chain. And so we're based out of Houston, and we, as a manufacturer, we struggle with some of the standards that have been previously brought up, whether it's related to children's mask standards or lack thereof. Also, given that we didn't have the traditional supply chain, given all the disruption, we actually serviced a lot of the consumer markets and sold on a lot of the top e-commerce websites, and we were actually victims of counterfeit and fraud. And we saw a lot of other, substandard or falsified test reports used to defraud hospitals, government organizations, GPOs, etc. And so, given our background from our team, we built NFC technology and put it into every one of our chips to create authentication and prove provenance of manufacturing that's tied to our quality system. And we're able to show, manufacture date, expiration date. We're able to tie it to the actual physical lot, show third-party test reports, internal testing. There were a lot of challenges in the national stockpile in terms of, expired products and things of that nature, and being able to tie, where those issues came from in the supply chain. Also, there was issues with recalls. We distributed some masks from another American manufacturer that had a recall, and there was no traceability. They had to recall the entire lot, and that's what we thought we could bring some innovation into helping the standards for traceability within the supply chain that I think could have been helpful, or create a safer clearinghouse. And that technology, we're actually a finalist for NIOSH and PPTL and NASA Tournament Labs for the Anti-Counterfeit Challenge. And so, happy to answer any questions that folks might have on that.
Thank you so much, Andy. I have a question. Does your technology, when it links back to your mask, does it explain to the user what a proper fit is?
Yeah, currently on our first use case, we did not, as part of our submission for this latest challenge, we include user instructions for, how to access the technology, how to put on the mask, all the steps and, other user information that we can include. We'll defer to the manufacturers on which, content they want to display, or instruction depending on the medical device. But that all can be, tied to a web URL from the physical product. So any of that can be added to the show.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'd like to open up to my entire panel. We have a few questions. Regarding innovative approaches to PPE manufacturing, what kinds of standards would be helpful to promote innovative approaches for manufacturers? Dan?
Well, let me take that in a couple different ways. Others have talked about the general public mask. And I do think that a general public mask would take a lot of pressure off demand from the public to get N95s or perhaps even KN95s. So I think development of that, is warranted. Otherwise, I would go back to my initial statement of, and that if a standard is created, it really has to have the business case around it. Otherwise, I think it could limit production.
Great, thanks. Brent, sorry, go ahead. Paul, you had something to say? We can't hear you.
I was just want to say that perhaps the presentation of the standards outside of the context of the certification process, that fluency in government certification is not necessarily a core competency of every company, and frankly, those documents are frightening. We brought in outside counsel to help us navigate them, and the guidance from outside counsel was just don't do it. It's too complicated. So a simplification of a later statement of standards, I think, would in language that's more comfortable for the people doing the innovation work would be really helpful.
Right, thanks. Brent, you had something you wanted to say on that?
Yeah, I think the simplification is extremely important that Paul mentioned. I mean, I've done work in and around the FDA for 10 years, and I didn't even try to sort through the NIOSH. I mean, well, I guess back up, we didn't make an N95 respirator because we thought that getting through NIOSH was going to be unattainable for any reasonable amount of time or money. So we just flat out didn't even try to make an N95 because of the regulatory hurdles. And I think that's a statement on its own. So a simplification of the standards and a demystification or clarification would be extremely helpful. And I know that obviously the FDA was dealing in a pandemic scenario, but when we submitted our surgical mask for approval to the FDA the first time, we were forced to go back and retest everything because they had changed the amount of mask required, at least from our perception, that was required for each of the tests. So I think having those standards transparent and settled and demystified, and less than kind of lawyer speak, I think would be extremely helpful and would promote more people to even take a shot at it. Because I think a lot of people opened up those documents the first time and said, like, this isn't even worth my time, or I can't imagine, how many commas I'm going to have to write in front of the check to a consultant to teach me how to do this, and without any guarantee of success or time frame.
Right. Andy, were you able to use the FDA, small business site to help you get approval with your mask?
No, like I'll echo Brent's comments. The NIOSH certification process is tough. It took us 3 tries, 6 months. A lot of it was they were just overloaded with applications, and I had to hire a professional team, folks that had previous medical device, FDA and consulting help. We've gotten 6 NIOSHs to date, including a surgical respirator. So I think that's quite a good accomplishment for a new company. But we had to raise a large amount of private equity, take that risk, like Brent intimated. It's not easy, and we missed a big portion of the market to help that shortages because of the delays and of getting approval process. It took months just to get any type of feedback, and there's also very stringent requirements. Even trying to get a black colored mask, we were dealing with a lot of consumers that wanted black N95s to be more fashionable, right? For example, but that's not part of their standards, and they actually kind of discourage those type of innovations. We made an antimicrobial mask. We're trying to use bio-based products in our raw materials to be more environmentally friendly. So, we have innovation core at the heart of our products, but that's not kind of how the standards are set. And I think was also touched on earlier, like for children's standards, there were so many counterfeit masks for children. We purchased over 50% of the masks that we purchased online for children were fake because there are no standards for children. And that's a huge public health crisis to know that, you know, we had parents that were horrified when they cut open their masks and showed us, and they asked us to do testing. That's how it all started. We didn't have a children's line. And, you know, again, as a new startup company, it's very expensive to get molding, to do design. And you're in the middle of a pandemic trying to produce, modify, cater to all these different markets. And, you know, when we had parents reach out to us and say, hey, these masks are, I'm sending my kids to school with paper mache, and we tested and, you know, they were all bad products. And that's kind of the reason why we got into the children's market in the first place, was because of that lack of standard. And so I think, you know, regulatory guidance, I think, you know, removing some of the friction and I like some of the open design platforms that Paul had talked about, what they were doing with Levi's. You know, we need those type of things because, again, I think someone touched on it earlier, as a manufacturer, it's very expensive to do different mold design change. You know, the settings for an adult versus the children are completely different. And so, you know, all of those challenges for a manufacturer, to Brent's point, it doesn't make sense to always go off and try to do all these different product lines when we're a small company. We don't have the infrastructure to be very specific to, you know, smaller communities. So it's a big challenge for us.
Right. So I'd like
Michelle,
to ask, sorry,
Michelle,
say,
can I jump in there for a second?
sure. Thank you.
Yeah, so, you know, the commentary on certification and so forth is the cost of doing business, right? And we have to remember that NIOSH stands for the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and their focus has been to the industrial workplace or healthcare workplace. Now, what COVID brought to us was the concern and care for the public, right? That's not under their scope of activity at this time. And, you know, that's why a workshop of this nature is engaging in that conversation. And we now, you know, we recognize, I hope we do through COVID, that we need to have more flexibility and being able to bring properly approved product, whatever that means, right? NIOSH, whatever, to not only the workplace, but also to the general public, and including children as well.
Right, I agree. Thank you so much, Claudio. So I would like to ask my panel for your reflections on standards for other types of PPE, not necessarily respirators or masks, or PPE for protection against threats that are not respiratory infections, such as wildfires or toxic chemicals.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, with New Palestine and the ever-present fire season and the West, great question. I think it's interesting because it's two different kinds of exposures, which a couple things. A, points to the need for clear federal communication. I would say in a non-regulatory way that the average American can understand. And the general public mask, respirator, however it's going to be called, I think is important because it could capture, or not capture, but filter out both you know, wildfire smoke particles plus, you know, biopathogens. So I think the development of that standard needs to be kind of carefully looked at to see what its range of possibilities can be, because it really could be helpful in these, you know, again, whether it's a pandemic or the ever-present wildfire season in the West. You know, you asked about other types of PPE. Some of the other speakers talked about anthropometric data. I think sort of a publicly accessible set of anthropometric data would be great. So we're all kind of, you know, working off the same, you know, general baseline of anthropometric data. And also with that, I think we could see, you know, what is the average size. You've got perhaps some entrepreneurial innovators that could make PPE edges of the bell curve, or try to make PPE for the entire bell curve. So I think that kind of data would help a lot of manufacturers.
Thanks so much, Dan.
I think what we've calibrated the work that we've done to address concerns around the firefighters and forest fires in the West, because that's an obvious and constant threat in San Francisco. But one of the concerns is the issues of liability. The standards are in place to say if the standards have been met, that there's a certain indemnification for the company that made the object. It's why there are so few. So it's such a rigorous process to enter the personal protective space and so little certificate or regulation of the source control space. And most everything that was out there, as people know, was for source control, but and everyone wanted the personal protection that was certified by the NIOSH designation. And so it really is that missing certification that's somewhere, something more effective than paper towel across the face, and something less rigorously certified than the occupational safety and health certified objects from NIOSH. I think that these other circumstances like fires, like chemical exposure, could be brought into a new, broader, general public use certification if that's possible.
Michelle.
Right.
Michelle,
Yes.
talking about wildfires and another disasters, flood relief, and so forth, in particular with respiratory protection, there are resources that we use in the industrial sector that the public can also use to tell you the type of respirator you use for the hazard. The EPA has put out a great document that is very specific for wildland fires during the fire and after the fire. When they're cleaning up and all that other stuff is in the air. Same thing for flood disaster. They have the same type of information available. Now, it's good for the workplace, but it's also good for the public. So my point in that is that we have resources that are available, but what COVID has brought to us is this PPE to the public, and that's what's brought it to the forefront. We in the industrial sector are used to this type of information, and the other panelists on it that have jumped into the business, God bless you for doing that. You're learning your way through this, right? So there are lots of resources for us to use that are available.
I guess I would say that we recognize those resources and they're valuable, but I think it might be a matter then of marketing. Why is it that the one mask that the general public wants is the one that's most constrained in supply? It's that there is a certain, for lack of a better word, cachet to the designation of N95 that makes it the most desirable piece of respiratory protection that the general public knows about. Maybe for lack of information, but there's or even the consideration or the distinction between personal protection versus birth control, that the lack of socialization of those distinctions has created an outsized demand for the N95 and a total lack of understanding of anything else. And I think it might then be a public communication effort that's necessary to promote the alternatives and therefore guide manufacturers into supplying for those alternatives.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Paul, around public education, because you do bring up a great point. And NIOSH gets a lot of flack, right? NIOSH has been dragged through the mud for 2 years, but to Claudio's point, the organization was not designed to do what it was asked to do. And also it's been absurdly underfunded and understaffed. So, I mean, those folks have done a tremendous job with the resources that they've been given. So if that's a pipe right into the market, that pipe is very small and needs to be widened by the federal government. So I'm going to rag's maybe a bad word. I'm going to challenge the federal government, like I did in my opening remarks, to step in and do more to regulate this market. I mean, the pipe that is NIOSH, allowing the gatekeepers of N95s in the market, that needs to be simplified and larger, right? So more products can get on the market more quickly. And on the other side, from a public health perspective, I mentioned at the beginning, healthcare systems being incentivized or required to buy a certain amount of PPE from U.S. manufacturers for the good of public health, for protection against a future pandemic and readiness. That's a pull-through effect on the market. And also, I think just overall with public health, I mean, the federal government, in my mind, hasn't done enough to step into the market and regulate these bad masks, right? I mean, imagine if Ford or Toyota were selling cars that every time they crashed, the seatbelt broke or the airbag didn't come open. I mean, there would be government inquiries and jail time for executives and so forth. But but we've been allowed for 3 years now to continue to buy products from these massive retailers that have literally no testing done on them whatsoever. I can't imagine how the federal government's still kind of allowing that to happen. The federal government has a history of stepping in the name of public health, whether it's, most recently with the vaping epidemic, right? I mentioned, auto safety, things like that. So it's two-sided, right? We need the pipe to get bigger and easier to get safe products into the market. And the federal government, I think, needs to do more to regulate what is and isn't safe, and also to help drive demand in the name of public health through PPE providers, through the U.S. healthcare system, to make that, mass flow analysis or equation, find a balance, because right now it's completely out of balance.
All right. Thanks, Brent. How helpful do you think it would be to have one globally accepted set of standards for PPE and tiered levels of fit aligned with different exposure and protection needs? For example, for the general public, industrial workers, healthcare workers, and then children.
If I could, sorry.
If
I could, I sit on various committees for CSA certification, of course, with NIOSH and so on. And trying to get an international agreement on particular types of standards is going to be an enormous task. And there's self-interest concerns, there's other factors that are involved, and I think it'd be nice, but I'll tell you, in all the years I've been in the business and serving on different certification panels, I can tell you firsthand, it's not easy. It's not going to be easy.
Agreed.
I just think about it from the technology perspective. Again, there's a lot of open standards in technology, right, that allows people to kind of, build into this, right? If as a manufacturer, if we had some kind of open source design that we could have worked with Paul's team, and as a manufacturer, we could have raised our hand to build those molds specific to those, or to a marginalized group that didn't have access to a specific type, it would have been a lot easier for us to facilitate that communication. So having a platform, I think, that allows for all these different parts of the supply chain to kind of work together on these open standards to help, build efficiencies. And, on the previous question, like, how do we go across to, things outside of masks, like, regardless if it's gown, gloves, or masks, they all have different standards. And, just through my experience and journey through this whole process, I kept thinking it has to be a better way than what we're doing currently, right? There was such a disconnect between how products were manufactured to distributed to tested. And that's why I think kind of having this like registry of products, right? Doesn't matter if it's masks or, other PPE, they should be held to these standards. And to Brent's point, there's compliance. It should be easily registered. Like if I go on Carfax, I should be able to look up, and the DMV should be able to look it up. Insurance should be able to look it up. Manufacturers, consumers can all look it up, right? And that's kind of part of the technology we're hoping to build, is this registry where all these products get registered from the manufacturer, and it's followed throughout the whole entire supply chain, so that you can see the compliance, the testing, and standards pre and post manufacturing to make sure that we have safe products that can be used for consumed for industrial, the healthcare, or public consumption.
Thanks so much, Andy. I would like to invite Dan from our earlier section. He has something to say here.
Thank you very much. I would just say that in regards to having an international standard, we would really have to develop some kind of mechanism for trusted partners. One of the things that we saw overall, very early on during the pandemic, there was an allowance made by NIOSH and FDA for the use of KN95s, and we got flooded with so many counterfeit KN95s that DOJ issued guidance saying, don't buy KN95s because every one that's on the marketplace was counterfeit, which was kind of staggering at the time that they did that. We saw hospitals and healthcare systems that were, getting masks that were counterfeited. And, these were coming in from places where we had diplomatic relations. We had gowns and other PPE that were recycled in India, for example, and that were used there, cleaned up supposedly and sent back to the United States. So having an international standard would probably only work with trusted partners. And, that would be the definition I think we would need to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I'd like to, at this point, open it up to everyone in the room. If you have something to add to this very important discussion, we'd be happy to hear from you.
Could I say something here, Michelle?
Please do. Please do.
Thank you. The earlier comments when various people were talking about the comfort level, the fitting capabilities, talking about strap adjustments and so forth, and the comment about reusable respirators. One of the things that came up from the COVID was the call to action by the CDC in 2020, where they asked the manufacturing community to develop a reusable respirator without an exhalation valve, with the filters designed in such a manner that they couldn't be touched or during the process. And we were one of the first to come to market, and there are other products on the market. And my point with this conversation is they are comfortable. We've done physical testing, exercises where there's lower breathing resistance, there is reduced heat buildup inside the face piece. The problem we have, this is a new product, and the marketplace doesn't know much about the product. NIOSH has done studies and they've done work to help make the market aware, but we have developed, the market and manufacturers have developed new solutions that are available today that provide greater comfort than typical disposable respirators. We have to remember where we're coming from. We have 60, 70 years of using a universal fitting product, and now we identified, because of COVID and the danger it causes, is that we need a tight fitting respirator, and it's here. There will be new innovations that'll come up shortly again as we continue to move forward. But as Dan mentioned earlier, it's all about the business case. Will the market pay for it? Right? Will the manufacturers invest in it? If there's no market and people don't buy it, it's not going to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudio. And now I would like to thank all of my amazing panelists today for such a great and very important discussion. And I would like to turn it over to our fearless leader, Linda. Linda, take it away.
Thank you, Michelle.